The Chicago Bears have 18 of their own players currently set to hit free agency this offseason, and they might only re-sign 2 or 3 of them.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, we look at the Chicago Bears' own free agents, a surprisingly long list of guys set to hit the market, and not a ton of them stand out as like guys that you gotta re-sign. Maybe more that you bring back because it's like, well, all right, you need some depth as a backup, but not high priority players that the Bears really got to get a deal done with besides Jaylon Johnson. So we'll start with him and then go through some of the other bigger names that are not so clear and obvious whether they'll be back. The likes of Darnell Mooney, Justin Jones, maybe even a couple of the backup offensive linemen, Rasheem Green, Deontay Foreman, and a whole lot of others. That we'll kind of get a sense of like, okay, what will the Bears need to potentially replace either with outside free agents or draft picks coming up? Let's start with Jaylon Johnson, though, because he is the biggest of the potential future free agents. But I almost don't even think of Jaylon Johnson fully as an upcoming free agent, because I think in my head, the way we've talked about it, the way we've heard Ryan Poles talk about it this offseason, it doesn't seem like the Chicago Bears are really going to let him even touch the open free agent market. I mean, coming off of the best season of his career, finally making a Pro Bowl and getting a lot of the recognition that it felt like he's been working up to over the course of this year and over the course of his career. Like, this is peak Jaylon Johnson, and it seems like whatever the Bears needed him to prove to them this year, he absolutely proved to them. And when Ryan Poles uses language like, yeah, we're not going to let Jaylon go anywhere, that to me signals the Bears will either work out a long-term contract with him before free agency starts, or what I think is more likely within the next couple of weeks here is that they'll end up using the franchise tag on Jaylon Johnson to at least ensure that he's here for this year and extend the amount of time that they have to negotiate that long-term contract and not let him go to other teams and see what the market might provide in that regard. They let him do that at the trade deadline and opted to keep him and didn't end up finding a suitor and all that stuff. So I think a Jaylon Johnson solution will come in one form or the other, and I think he will be a Chicago Bear in 2024. Beyond that, we'll see, but I think the franchise tag at a very minimum there. He, to me, is the only, like, super, super obvious, yeah, he's back, do everything you can to get him back. Everyone else, you can make arguments for. I don't think there's any player where it's like, for sure, get that guy as far away from this roster as possible. But, like, when you look at the list of 18 that the Bears are working with here, it's, you know, Unique Ngakoue, Justin Jones, Lucas Patrick, Dan Feeney, Robert Tonyan, Rasheem Green, Mercedes Lewis, Deontay Foreman, Patrick Scales, Equanimeous St. Brown, Dylan Cole, Nathan Peterman, Trent Taylor, and then you get to some of the young guys like Colin Johnson and Josh Blackwell and Joe Reed, but like not a lot of like super key guys that you got to make sure you keep around. I think I'm most fascinated by the Darnell Mooney conversation because I still believe Darnell Mooney can be, and will be a highly effective wide receiver in the NFL. Now, how highly effective, I guess, is where there's room for debate here. He might not ever be the 1,000-yard guy that we saw 2 years ago on this Chicago Bears offense, but I do think, especially if he ends up somewhere else, as that's what the feeling is like, yeah, that they're going to let Darnell Mooney go. Like, I think he can go to another team, probably on a cheaper deal, and outperform that contract and get back to looking like a solid, if not number 2, number 3 wide receiver in the NFL who can be a playmaking contributor to an offense. Not like a dynamic game changer, but like still a valuable playmaker. And I can't help but feel like a lot of the Darnell Mooney, I guess, decrease in production, I mean, it certainly lines up with Luke Getsy taking over as offensive coordinator. There were other factors along the way, but that's when his production dropped off. And not to say that it's Luke Getsy's fault purely that Darnell Mooney dropped off, but more so Getsy's gone, and likely Justin Fields likely to be traded at this point, and that Caleb Williams likely to be the next Chicago Bears quarterback. And so if it's new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, new system, new everything, like that would seem to be the kind of like fresh start that we hear people talk about for Darnell Mooney, right? Like, oh, he just needs to go to another team and get a fresh start with a new quarterback and a new system. It's like, well, got that here now. So I personally would re-sign Darnell Mooney. I'm not going to pay him top dollar or anything, but presumably his free agent market is, low. He's not going to command a huge contract, I wouldn't think, given his lack of production. But I really think the Bears could get more out of Mooney in the next couple of seasons than they've gotten out of him in the previous couple of seasons. You look like individually for Mooney at his wide receiver separation numbers, he was getting open at about the same rate as DJ Moore. So, right, it's not to say that Mooney was always wide open and that Fields just never hit him and that that there's zero fault to Darnell Mooney here. Like, sure, I don't think he was as good this season as he was earlier in his career for reasons that maybe we don't know and can't quite exactly pin down specifically, but I still think he can be very good for an offense. And why let that go? Like, unless there's just he's even got a new wide receivers coach. Like, I'm trying to think, like, is there some impasse where it's just like you wouldn't want to keep playing for Matt Eberflus for some reason? Because it's a whole new offensive staff and a new quarterback. So, I get that sometimes it's just like change of scenery literally is helpful for that, but I still feel like Mooney is a receiver who can get open, who can make plays after the catch and be maybe not a 1,000-yard guy, but a 700-yard guy, an 800-yard guy, a 600-yard guy, like in that range, and that's valuable in your offense. Like, if you're not asking Darnell Mooney to be your top option, I think he can be great for you. Like, my idea is like re-sign Darnell Mooney and then draft Romeo Odunze or Malik Neighbors or whoever in the draft and make Mooney your 3. Like, that's fine. Or have them sort of rotate between 2 and 3. Like, you don't have to re-sign Mooney and say, hey, you're the number 2 guy behind DJ Moore. We're going to give you a lot of targets. Like, no. But add him into this mix at wide receiver. Why just let that walk when he's a guy who, he's a hard worker. Like, what he's like character and locker room wise. Like, all you're going to try and do is replace him with another outside free agent and draft picks to try and get you back to what Mooney used to be able to produce for you. And I still feel like he can still get there. So, this could be the right kind of reset for him to still stay in Chicago. Ultimately, I think the Bears will probably let him go and that they'll just decide that, a parting of ways is not the right way to go. And certainly, like, this season was particularly tough with Mooney with, the Hail Mary play at the end of that game falling out of his hands and he's not getting a ton of targets compared to previous years in his career. But, like, at the same time, Darnell Mooney averaged a career high in yards per reception. Every time he did catch the ball, he was getting 13.4 yards on every single one of those catches. That was second only to DJ Moore in this Chicago Bears offense. Maybe not a great benchmark there. The other receivers weren't necessarily threatening a ton, but like he was still producing at a decent level on a per catch basis. He just didn't have the kind of volume that we're typically used to for Darnell Mooney. And so I still think, this is not like name from the past, Cameron Meredith. He had that one like 800-yard year with the Bears, and then we kind of thought, oh man, Meredith could still grow into something, and then went on to the Saints, I think, and never did anything ever again in the NFL worth a while. But Mooney, to me, I think, has done it before and is still performing individually at a high level, even if the numbers and the production haven't quite matched that. So I would re-sign Darnell Mooney for the right price. I don't think the Chicago Bears will. I don't think they're going to re-sign very many of their own free agents, especially, the quote-unquote bigger name guys, the more recognizable names of Bears players that are going to go, including some key guys on the defensive line. We'll take a look at the cases for, Yannick Ngakoue, Justin Jones, Rasheem Green, and then a bunch of the other free agents on this roster next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. It's an important part of taking care of your mental health. I do online therapy every single week, and it's really important for me. I compare it to going to the gym, where I don't go to the gym because my body's broken, but I go to the gym because I want my body to be its healthiest. And I don't go to therapy because my brain is broken, but I go because I want my brain and my mental health to be at its best. And that's what BetterHelp is here to help provide for you. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule because therapy can be different for everyone. And most of us have bigger problems than just our favorite sports team or what the Bears are going to do at quarterback. And so it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while with someone who's objective and educated on how to work with you on those issues. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. The Chicago Bears have a few different free agents coming up here on the defensive line. And as it sits today, I'm not sure any of them will for sure be coming back. I think there's a chance one or two perhaps, but of the three, there's Yannick Ngakoue, Justin Jones, and Rasheem Green. Let's start with Ngakoue, because I think it's the quicker and easier answer here, right? Signed to a one-year deal entering training camp last season, and we kind of had the impression like mercenary type, right? He's here to come in, produce, and then in theory hit the free agent market the next season again after another big season and try and cash in on a longer-term deal, but like was here in Chicago as sort of the veteran stopgap because the Bears needed another pass rusher and hadn't really addressed that position. But Ngakoue comes to Chicago and has the least productive season of his entire career. 4 sacks in 13 games, a handful of tackles for losses in there, but generally, I think at best we can say disappointing and underwhelming, and at worst, I mean, is it too strong to say he was terrible? I mean, maybe that's not fair, but I think expectations were a lot higher for Ngakoue, who I believe had worked with the Bears defensive line coach, Justin Smith, with the Raiders perhaps for a year, or maybe my timelines aren't lining up there. But regardless, like Ngakoue was supposed to come here and be that. He was supposed to be the number one pass rusher before Montez Sweat got here, but he was disappointing until then. But then you added Montez Sweat. It's like, all right, great. Now Sweat's going to get all the attention, and Ngakoue should be able to eat, right? And it just never really came together that way. Like there was flashes of it, and first game of the season against Green Bay, gets the sack, and then quiet for a while, gets one against Washington in that win, then quiet for a while, gets one against the Panthers in that win. Believe it or not, like his sacks correlated with wins pretty well because he also got 3 of his sacks came in 3 wins against the Commanders, the Panthers, and then the Lions win as well. So and then he missed the final 4 games of the season there with injuries on injured reserve. So it was like big disappointment, and I don't think it seemed unlikely then that the Bears would want to bring him back. I don't know what the price number would be there either. It just feels like, yeah, that one probably not going to happen there. You could make an argument that Rasheem Green was also a pretty big disappointment. Lower expectations, but didn't do much of note. Not his career worst year in terms of production, but I mean, he had 2 sacks as an edge rusher in this defense when there was ample opportunity for him to step in and have more production, right? He was one of these guys they signed last year, not to a big contract, but to a feeling like, okay, he had a decent year a couple years earlier with Seattle, was pretty good in the rotation in Houston the year before, that maybe he could come to Chicago, bigger opportunity, more playing time, more snaps, and elevate his production a little bit, step up and be better than he had been in the past. And 2 sacks, also in the Washington and Carolina games, believe it or not, but those were the games where the disappointing free agents came in and got their sacks, I guess. I don't know, but not anything really to speak of in the passing game. Got moved around too much in the running game, really was demoted to 3rd string and what felt like 4th string on the defensive end rotation there behind Dominique Robinson for some time. Like it was Sweat and it was Ngakoue and it was Walker, and then kind of Robinson and Green took up the rear. Like I don't feel like Rasheem Green did a lot to where the Bears look at that and go, yeah, let's make sure we bring this guy back. Like it was a 1-year deal. They tried it out. Maybe it wasn't everything they had hoped it would be, and ultimately moved on. And I think Ngakoue and Green are pretty destined to play elsewhere in 2024, and I'm not sure that they're going to be desperately missed, but they will need to be replaced, and I think those things can be true at the same time. The one that I'm not sure what to expect for is Justin Jones. He was a guy that the Bears have spoken very highly of when they signed him, and highly of him entering his 2nd year of that 2-year contract with the Chicago Bears. You may recall Justin Jones was the one who aggressively called out Green Bay Packers fans and the Green Bay Packers during this past offseason, talking about how, we're coming for you and all that stuff. Obviously didn't pan out as well during the season and such. And another guy who I keep kind of waiting for him to play really well and like ascend and look like a difference maker for this Bears defensive line. And again, we just don't really end up seeing a ton of it. He had a career high 4.5 sacks this season, but it didn't, that didn't feel like, wow, what a great season from Justin Jones. It felt like, okay, maybe the production was a little bit more consistent in that regard. He ended up getting a better rate of pressures this season, generated a lot more of them and got a lot of quarterback hits along the way, but also missed a lot more tackles this season compared to last year and was, I felt like, sloppy in the running game at times. Like, not that I was expecting Justin Jones to be a 10-sack guy, a defensive tackle, but, the feeling was when the Bears signed him 2 years ago, 2-year contract, he was coming off a 3-sack year in LA and feeling like maybe he wasn't in quite the right system and could come to the Bears, be that 3-technique, pin your ears back pass rusher, and be even better than a 3-sack-a-year guy, or the 1 year he had 3 sacks in LA. Comes to Chicago, year one, has 3 sacks on a bad defense. I mean, Bears defense didn't have a lot of talent in that first year. They were tearing things down, and it was rough. So it was like, okay, after 1 year, he did some things, and it was willing to be like, okay, we can be patient with Justin Jones, I guess. You need a better interior pass rush, but, he's still on the younger side. He was 26 last season, 27 this year. Will turn 28 during the 2024 season. And, I get 3 to 4.5 sacks is a step up, but it's not quite consistent enough pressure. Like, the Bears need a big-time interior disruptor, someone who's really going to break up the offensive line in the middle and take some of that attention away from Montez Sweat on the edge. And it seems like last year we talked about pursuing that big-time 3-technique pass rusher. Javon Hargrave, Zach Allen, Draymond Jones. The Bears were reportedly going after all those guys. Didn't sign any of them. Stuck with Justin Jones and drafted Gervon Dexter and Zach Pickens and stuff. And, sure, that was a backup plan, but it didn't seem like Justin Jones as your 3-technique pass rusher was plan A last offseason. So it's hard for me to go into this offseason thinking that's going to be plan A again. Now, could they re-sign him and have him be a part of that rotation and still pursue a bigger name free agent or a potential early draft pick again to keep adding to defensive tackle? I think so. To me, he wasn't so disappointing that's like, no, do not re-sign him. Rasheem Green and Unique Ngakoue, I don't think that's going to happen. Justin Jones, I think they could reasonably re-sign him, but I still don't think he's plan A. I don't think the plan is, Justin Jones and Gervon Dexter, we're good. Don't need to touch that position anywhere else. Re-sign him, sure, but then still go after Chris Jones. Still go after the defensive tackle that you think can be that big-time playmaker there. And Justin Jones can be a backup. That's okay. You're not going to pay him so much money that you can't afford to keep him on the bench. No, he's in that borderline starter backup rotation type money, and I'm okay with that if you want to re-sign him, but I'm not going to be heartbroken if the Bears let him go and ultimately aim a little bit higher at the 3-technique position. I think they should aim higher, and it's just a matter of whether you want Justin Jones back with that or whether you just want to part ways, move on, and aim higher. That's how I think they should approach it with the defensive line. Some other key names out there, but not a lot of other guys I think they're really going to go out of their way to bring back. We'll look at some of the key depth pieces and a couple of names that we could make an argument for bringing back, but you're not going to be upset or feel like you're really missing something if you don't re-sign Deontay Foreman or you don't re-sign Equanimous St. Brown. And we got to throw Nathan Peterman in that conversation as well. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I use the Game Time app, and I really like it because Game Time has all-in pricing, so I'm not paying the fees, the hidden fees and stuff on the other mainstream, ticket broker sites. I'm not going to call them up by name, but the one that everyone's been mad at. Yeah, with Game Time, the price you see for the ticket is the price you pay, and I save money by buying my tickets on Game Time as opposed to directly from the venue. I went to the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Denver Nuggets just on Monday of this week to see Giannis versus Jokic. It was a great game, and I bought my tickets through Game Time. I could see my view from my seat, and I paid less. I looked at the same seats on the Bucks official website. I paid less for them because I avoided all the fees and other stuff with the all-in pricing at Game Time, and I got to see my view from my seat. It was great. Super easy experience. I've bought tickets from Game Time for a lot of different things and really enjoyed it every time. You should try it for yourself. As they say, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, Create an account and use our promo code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem our code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we've heard the bigger names on the Bears free agent list, but there's still some quality players, or at least valuable players to the Bears that are set to hit the market that, you don't necessarily want to let them all walk, but you're not married to bringing them back. If you look at the list of upcoming free agents, I think the one who's probably most likely to come back is the long snapper, Patrick Scales. I don't really have long snapper analysis for you. I mean, he seems fine, I guess. I mean, he's 36, so maybe they want to go younger, but I think you re-sign Patrick Scales and maybe bring in some competition or something, but he's probably pretty sure to come back because otherwise you got to find a new long snapper, but you never know. But it's the same special teams coordinator, so I would think that's probably in the works there. Beyond that, I mean, does Mercedes Lewis want to come back for his age 40 season, come back to the Bears, or does he want to go somewhere where he might have a slightly better chance of winning a Super Bowl before he has to retire? I mean, I could see it. He seemed to like it here, but it's a little bit hard to try and pin that down. And then depth guys. I mean, Josh Blackwell, the backup cornerback, is an exclusive rights free agent. So basically, the Bears, he's not going to sign anywhere else. The Bears will probably just re-sign him for a really cheap contract like that. He hardly even counts as a free agent, so he'll be back. But I think there's some interesting conversations to be had here about, let's start with D'Onta Foreman. Came to Chicago on a 1-year deal to try and, keep producing at a high level and maybe get back out into free agency and try and get a better contract. Only had 400 yards this season, 4 touchdowns, but still had a good yards per game average and was there were games where he was good. When Khalil Herbert was out, he was the lead back and had some really impressive performances to me that feel like he's a guy who could be, you're not going to make him solely your lead back all the time, but can be an important part of the rotation, right? Against the Raiders, almost 90 yards and 2 touchdowns, had 80 yards against the Panthers, more than 80 yards against the Saints, and 70 yards against the Vikings. He had some games there where you felt like, okay, is he a home run threat every time he touches the ball? No. I mean, is he going to be a dynamic playmaker in your offense? No, but if, he's as good a running back as anybody. I mean, he's a guy, you give him the ball, he's not going to fumble, he's going to get you some hard-fought yards. I like D'Onta Foreman. I would bring him back in the same role, right? You're not bringing him back to be the starter. You're not bringing him back to get all the carries. And he probably wasn't happy being a healthy scratch for some of those games down the stretch and probably won't be back and would rather go play somewhere else where he might have a bigger role. But if he'd come back on another 1-year deal around the same price, I don't have a problem with what the Bears had in the backfield last season. Herbert, Johnson, Foreman, bring it back. Let Johnson, be another year more experienced and keep getting better. Khalil Herbert still on the ascend as a player. That's a fine backfield with me. I'd bring him back if he's cheap and if he wants to come back, but at this point, I don't think he'll want to, but never say never. I think we got to leave that open. How about the offensive line? No one wants to see Lucas Patrick back as the Bears starting center. No one wants to see Dan Feeney back as a Bears starting center. But assuming the Bears cut Cody Whitehair as a cap casualty, the Bears will have 0 centers under contract. And so the only reason I pose this as a question is I'm not re-signing those guys to start. But Lucas Patrick to be re-signed as a backup, or Dan Feeney to be re-signed clearly as a backup, where you're also signing a starting center, or you're drafting a starting, you're addressing starting center somewhere. But then you need a backup center. So would you rather have Dan Feeney, or would you rather have a Lucas Patrick as people that maybe a little bit better? You're never going to find a backup center that's great. Otherwise, he'd be a starter. Every backup center is going to have flaws. Lucas Patrick, not great. Dan Feeney, not great. But they're backups for a reason. And Ryan Poles traded for Dan Feeney. Is that incentive for him to say, let's re-sign him? Maybe they do have a particular belief in Feeney as a backup and would re-sign him. And maybe let Lucas Patrick go because he was kind of a Luke Getsy guy anyway, and that was the big connection there. But still have the same offensive line coach, so maybe he might want Lucas Patrick. It wouldn't surprise me if the Bears re-signed one of them, but was very clear, this is not the starter. This is backup to the starter we also acquired, but you feel okay, if your new starter at center gets hurt and you had to throw Lucas Patrick in there for a game or whatever, could you survive? Yeah, they survived with him this year. Well, it's not ideal. It's not what you want, but okay, he knows he doesn't know the system because it's a new system, but he knows. He doesn't know the quarterback either because it's going to be Caleb Williams. He knows his teammates on the offensive line. That's the little bit of extra value you might get out of either of those guys as your backup center, because you are going to need a backup center. You're also going to need backup tight ends. Cole Kmet is your only tight end under contract right now. So as much as Robert Tonyan did nothing this season except drop a huge pass from Justin Fields, you do need a backup tight end. I think you can do better than Robert Tonyan. 11 catches, 112 yards, the lowest he's had in 4 or 5 years. Again, like a Luke Getsy guy coming over from Green Bay. I wouldn't expect Robert Tonyan to be brought back then, but I still think he can be a decent backup in the NFL. I don't think he's a bum. It just didn't, for whatever reason, the production was not there this year in Chicago, but I think he could go to the Raiders or go back to Green Bay and be more productive there than he was with the Bears here. So I'm kind of expecting that for Tonyan. But Marcedes Lewis is a more interesting conversation there. I love watching Marcedes Lewis. He was a great blocker and occasionally he only made 4 catches for 29 yards this year, but one of those was a touchdown. And I don't know, I felt like he caught a couple of checkdowns where it was convenient, and it was like, all right, like that's Marcedes Lewis. I would absolutely take him back. I think as he turns 40 in May, I would imagine. I mean, he didn't have many free agent suitors last offseason, so if there's no suitors and he wants to come back, I'd take him back. But I'd imagine like if he could find a way to go to the Chiefs or the 49ers or maybe the Ravens or one of these like Super Bowl teams, the Bears are probably not going to be a Super Bowl team in 2024. They could be a playoff team, and we'll get to that in the rest of the offseason. Depends on how things go. But like 2024 is not the Bears' Super Bowl window per se. It doesn't feel like that. So if Marcedes is going to do one more year, I think he'd prefer to go somewhere where he has a better shot at a ring. But if not, hey, welcome back to Chicago, big dog. We'd absolutely love to have him here. And then I'll throw in the wide receivers. Equanimeous St. Brown, Trent Taylor, not to be your number 1, not to be your number 2, not to be your number 3, but as a number 4, number 5 wide receiver. Right now, your wide receivers under contract: DJ Moore, Tyler Scott, Velus Jones, and Simba Webster. You're going to need some wide receiver depth. You're going to need to sign better players at the top, but if Equanimeous St. Brown is your number 4 or number 5 wide receiver, okay, he's a good blocker. Sure, he plays special teams, sure. And Trent Taylor is your punt returner last season. It wasn't great, but wasn't terrible. I don't know, he was average. Okay, he caught the ball, unlike Velus Jones. I mean, okay, I'll take that. I guess he could re-sign either of those guys. I wouldn't be mad at it. Remember, they did give Equanimeous St. Brown a contract extension already. His first year was a 1-year deal. At the end of that deal, they gave him an extension to be a second year in Chicago. So they seem to have liked Equanimeous St. Brown, but another Luke Getsy Green Bay Packers guy. So maybe he goes back to Green Bay. Maybe he goes to the Raiders. I don't know. We'll see how that ends up playing out. And then last but not least, but maybe least, actually. Last but also least, Nathan Peterman. I mean, I have a long history of not being a big Nathan Peterman fan on this podcast. I don't think they should re-sign him. But if you're going to draft Caleb Williams and Tyson Bagent is your backup quarterback, it would be nice to have a more experienced veteran number 3 quarterback. Ideally, someone who's not Nathan Peterman, like a better player. Nathan Peterman, again, probably a good human being, not a fan of him as a quarterback. So I don't want to make it, I don't have a vendetta personally against Peterman. I just don't think he's very good, and they should roster a better veteran quarterback with that 3rd spot than Nathan Peterman. But I get wanting a veteran quarterback number 3 in that spot, and I could see Peterman being brought back just to be someone in the room who has more experience than Tyson Bagent and Caleb Williams. Can't rule that out. So when it comes to this list of Bears free agents, right? It's like, okay, I think for sure going to bring back Jaylon Johnson. That's it for sure's. Probably going to bring back the long snapper Patrick Scales, and then maybe could see them bringing, like those are 2 guys, and then maybe could see them bringing back Justin Jones, Dan Feeney, or Lucas Patrick as a backup, Marcedes Lewis, maybe Deontay Foreman, maybe Equanimeous St. Brown, maybe Nathan Peterman. So you could see anywhere from like 2 of these guys re-signed, and everyone else you move on from and say, sorry, we're going to go in a different direction. Or you could see 5 or 6 of those guys brought back and say, yeah, we know you. You're a decent enough backup. We'll run it back with you again on a cheap 1-year minimum deal. Regardless, that still leaves like 10 other guys that are just going to let go, and that the Bears are going to have to replace with outside free agents and draft picks to fill those spots on the depth chart. We'll break down who they could go after in free agency and the NFL draft to fill every need on this Bears roster right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Keep coming back every day for your daily Bears talk. And of course, every day we're going to give you another opportunity to bear down.